and I have no desire of sinning whatsoever because I love God and I want to serve Him forever.
Hey, my name is Aaron Burke, and I'm so glad that you're watching this. We put together this conversation to talk about the Brownsville Revival. This is being filmed in 2025, which means it is 30 years since. Does it feel like 30 years?
It does.
It does. 30 years. It's just crazy to me to think back that long. And 1995, God poured out His Spirit. If you didn't see the first video we put on, kind of give all the history of the church behind the scenes. Pastor Richard, obviously you were there 2.5 years before revival started, and seeing what the Lord has done. We have now got into the revival. People are coming from all over the world. You just started youth ministry back up again. It had impacted the schools, and I got to see that, be part of that. My sister, who I'm sure will watch this, was greatly impacted. She was a couple of years older than me, so she was in the youth group, actually way before I was, but greatly impacted by that, and good friends with a lot of the kids in the youth group. So I want to talk about just your approach and even the church's approach. Where was this? Is a revival of repentance, really? I mean, it was we saw so much drastic repentance. I remember, I don't know what night it was, maybe Saturday night, they do baptisms, and Friday night baptisms. And you would see these stories that were just unreal of life changed. Where was discipleship in all this? Where was discipleship in the youth ministry? What was the next step in all that?
Yeah, so I remember, like I said, we had 350 in that first youth service when we came back. Mm-hmm. And I was both excited and scared at the same time, because I've always felt like discipleship is the key to establishing the kingdom. Jesus said, "Go make disciples of all nations."
Right.
And yet the message is the same every night. Repentance was it was, and so I don't want to use the word shallow, but it was the same message every night.
Right.
And so I'm thinking, oh boy, I have potential major problems coming down the road, because if that's all you're being taught or all you're hearing night after night after night, I'm thinking I'm going to have a lot of babies around here changing diapers and burping and baby bottle feeding.
Right.
And I've got to come up with some kind of way to disciple these kids.
Right.
But we're in church every night. And so I remember I prayed to the Lord. I said, "Lord, please, I've got to have something simple, because we're just doing it every night. I've got to have something inspirational, and they won't do it, and I've got to have something that's practical to actually bring change." And so I actually asked the question, okay, so if discipleship is required by everybody, what is it that everybody should be doing? Okay.
Right.
And I just came with this simple conclusion. Okay, we should all be reading the Bible. So I just simply asked them to read one chapter a day.
Yep.
Everybody should be praying. So I just simply asked them to, spend 10 minutes in prayer and record it in your journal.
Yeah,
we had to journal.
Check the box, yeah.
Right? And then everybody should be witnessing. And we taught the young people what witnessing was. Witnessing was not inviting somebody to the revival.
Right.
Witnessing was sharing your faith, and they had to record that witness.
Right.
Right? And then what I did was I just put one leader with every 6 students. And because we're at revival every night, you could pick which night you want to come to discipleship, and they would come an hour before revival, and meet with our leader. And it turned out to be brilliant, Aaron, because talking about one mind and one accord, everybody's memorizing the same verse of Scripture. That's right, we had to memorize one verse of Scripture each week. Mm-hmm. Everybody was reading the same thing, and so you would come together, and they would come in, quote their verse. And then they would just say, "Okay, we read Matthew 1-7. Who would like to go first?" and it gave the young people an opportunity to learn how to express and share what they're learning, verbally express what God's teaching to them, and they're feeding one another. Over here in Matthew chapter 5 when he said, and yeah, me too. And it was like a frenzy, and it was always too short for them to get bored. I mean, one of my things was I want them leaving wanting more. Mm-hmm. And so it turned out to be a brilliant thing. And I made them maintain the memory verses that they had memorized before, they had to keep up with that. And so Aaron, literally, we had 185 students, I know, that within a couple of years could quote 50 verses by memory, just like that.
It's incredible.
Simply line upon line, precept upon precept. And the discipleship was the thing that kept them.
Yep.
We need the power of God to transform their heart, but then discipleship is what keeps that heart transformed.
Yep.
And so that was the fruit that was able to remain long after the revival, as we are now defining it, had ceased.
What about the adults that got saved? Did they have that in the local church?
Not really.
Not really. Okay.
Not really.
Was that talked about? Was that, hey, we got to figure out a next step for them?
Yeah. So not to be critical, that was not, but that was something that really we did well in the youth department.
Right.
That I think was lacking in.
What was Cleansing Stream?
Cleansing Stream was a ministry helping people with deliverance and dealing with.
It's not a
wounds of the
long-term
faith.
process.
It was like a 13-week class that then had a go-away weekend for this activation and cleansing.
Was this
and
later into revival or early?
It was, I would say, within the first year or two.
Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
maybe 2 years.
Okay. Where was the idea of BRSM? Where did it come from?
So, to be honest with you.
And by the way, if you don't know what BRSM was the Brownsville Revival School of Ministry.
Correct. And it was a school of ministry. It actually started in 1997, 98. Yeah, somewhere around there. Okay. So the idea of it, actually, I came to Pastor Kilpatrick a year or so before, and I said, Pastor, we've got to train, because again, we were from day one.
Can I ask you about that real quick?
Yeah.
So when you say you went to Pastor Kilpatrick,
yeah,
you're in office hours. You're
No.
showing up to his house. Like, how are you meeting with your pastor when he's running he's shepherding a revival?
Most of it was during the green room time beforehand.
Very organic.
A quick conversation. Although there were a number of meetings that Pastor and I would have, maybe twice a year. Often I initiated it at IHOP at like 3:00 in the morning.
That is how y'all met.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
Post revival, y'all are let's go out to eat and go.
Yeah. After revival service, because that's the only time we really had. Yeah,
that is wild.
Yeah. But I had planted the idea and saw the need for, again, a deeper level of training and discipleship, because that's always been my heartbeat. Yep. And but I didn't have the skill, I didn't have the education, I didn't have any of that. So a couple of years later, when Dr. Brown, who was a ministry friend of Steve Hill, heard about what had happened.
That was their connection.
Did
he know John Kilpatrick?
I'm not sure that they knew each other.
Okay.
I don't know that
And had he been around revival the first few years?
No. He heard about it
because
Steve probably called him and said, hey, you got to get down here.
Right.
What we've been hungry for is here, And when he came, he had the training, the skills, and so forth. And so he was actually the one that started the school.
Okay. Yeah. So he came with the intentions of starting the school.
No, I don't think so. He came, first of all, just to check out the revival, loved it, stayed there, and then after being there, the conversation began to brew.
Did BRSM kind of fill that void of like, okay, you got saved here, this is your next discipleship thing, or was it purely you're going into ministry?
It was pure you're going into ministry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And what was your involvement with BRSM?
I was just one of the professors, and I taught discipleship and I taught youth ministry class. Those were the two classes I taught for the first several years.
Yeah. And this is its biggest moment a year or so in. There's how many students?
So the first semester we had 120 students. That was in January. Again, 97, 98, I can't remember which one. By the next year, we had 1,200 students.
1,200 students.
In 1 year.
From all over the world.
From all over the world.
That is unbelievable. Yeah. I remember, for those that don't, we would go to revival services all the time. And I remember you're sitting there. You got to think this is before social media. especially if you didn't see the first video. Like, I remember sitting there specifically and talking to the person next to me. I'm like, where are you from? They're like, Germany. Where are you from? Oh, Korea. Where are you from? South Africa. And we're like, y'all here for the beach? You're on vacation? No, they were all there for revival. Yeah. The world was coming there. Yeah. And it was shocking. I remember at 16 years old, I went on a missions trip to Nepal, and I'm there, and I'm in this back hill country of Nepal, and there's an old it's not old, it was probably brand new, Lyndall Cooley, CD right there. I mean, it was impacting the world. Yeah. It was really bizarre. So when you think of 1,200 students, of course, because it literally was, when you were in it, did you recognize what you were in?
So personally, I wasn't as enamored by that as I was with the presence of the Lord. Mm-hmm. I mean, it really.
Right.
We celebrated it. We acknowledged it every night. I mean, we would have at least 300 to 500 internationals every night. In fact, they ended up having interpreters, like 10 or 12 interpreters for 10 or 12 languages every night for these people. They would get their earbuds.
And Pastor Patrick would always have them people stand. And what country are you from?
Yeah.
That was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you weren't as enamored by all that.
I mean, it was cool, but honestly, that's not comparison to the presence of the Lord.
Right.
I mean, that's really cool.
Yeah.
But not in presence of that.
When did you, because then you start getting speaking invites and then you start traveling, and was there a rule, you can travel, but you got to be here? Like, is there, or, because then, I mean, the demand on all the leaders in the revival to go, we got to take this all over the world. How did y'all balance that?
I don't even remember that conversation, to be honest with you. I know that they wanted us to go out to help spread the revival and to feed, take care of it and all that. But the invitations came immediately. I mean, I went from being a nobody to instant invitation to the largest platforms around the world. It was head spinning. Yeah.
And then this is the pride side of it. How did you keep that?
It's interesting because that question was asked me instantly. Right. But it was never an issue. And for me, it was never an issue because, first of all, I had already been in youth ministry for 12 years. So if I was all that in a bag of peanuts, it would have happened a long time ago. So so I had enough experience to realize this is not me, okay? But secondly, it is hard to be prideful in the presence of the Lord. I mean, it was humbling. We were humbled to be able to have a front seat, a reserved parking lot every day at such a move of the Spirit. It was a humbling experience. It was not an egotistical pride thing.
Right.
It really was not. And what's interesting is one of the things I did learn through that is that everywhere Jesus went, there was both revival and riots. And there is always an ugly side of revival. So you asked about media earlier. So going a couple of years into it, there was all of a sudden all the media, national media was coming from all over, promoting it.
I remember it was on Rolling Stone magazine, all this crazy stuff.
Everything. Yes. Nightline, mean, ABC News, CBS, everybody was covering it. It was such a phenomenon, right? And all of them were very positive, but there were some that were attacking it, And I remember Benny Hinn made a statement one time. I thought that is so true. He said, "Great light attracts a lot of bugs." And so there were a lot of people who were, quote unquote, in ministry who came there and wanted to be identified with it for their own agenda, for their own promotion. And so we had a lot of people doing that. But then when all the negative promo came out, all of a sudden they wanted to be detached from it. It was almost like a cleansing and a purifying of the move of the Spirit, so that those who didn't, they wanted they want it for ill purposes.
Right.
All of a sudden, it moved them away from it.
How do they monitor the media stuff? Because I think of like, if that kind of thing happened with my staff, I'm like, is the youth pastor equipped to, they're getting asked by Time Magazine and USA Today, like, were y'all, hey, this is what we say, we don't say this,
None of that took place, Aaron.
That's wild.
That's crazy, right?
Right.
We were never mentored. There was, so on the team, we were about as different as you can be. Mm-hmm. Steve Hill, John Kilpatrick, Lyndall Cooley, later on Dr. Brown. If you want to throw me in that mix, we were as different as you can be. But we had a deep honor for one another and respect for one another and valued the differences that we all brought to the team. But I was never mentored. Now, on what to say or what not to do, but in all honesty, I never talked to the media. When the media came to my house, I never answered the door.
Wow.
I never.
And why?
Because I was afraid of saying something wrong or being misquoted.
Okay.
And I've never liked the spotlight.
Yeah.
I've never liked the platform.
Yeah. By the way, I've had to convince him to do this. Just so you know.
This is the reason why it's 30 years later before I've ever talked about it.
I love it. Okay. With the negative press, I remember being a teenager, and the Pensacola News Journal did like 5 days in a row.
Yeah.
Do you remember this? It was it was the church. It was each of the leaders of the revival, money, the whole thing, and it just blasted it. And like, did y'all feel that? Were you just, we got a mission, we don't care what's going on, or?
Well, we knew what God was doing.
Right.
And Pastor Kerry, his favorite phrase was, let the dogs bark, the caravan's moving on. I mean, let the naysayers say what they want.
Right.
We know what's happening here. And so we were very focused. That was something I have to really commend Steve Hill and John Kilpatrick on, is they kept us focused. Probably one of the greatest phrases was a Leonard Ravenhill statement, I'm sure, that the opportunity of a lifetime must be seized during the
lifetime of the opportunity.
A lifetime of the opportunity.
Yep.
And so we were focused on what God was doing and not getting distracted by all of the stuff that we knew was being twisted.
Right.
And so we were not going to waste our time on that. That was a distraction from what God was doing, and we were staying focused.
All right, two things, and then we're gonna kind of try to land this plane in the next little bit. How did the leaders and the staff and the volunteers? How did y'all's families survive this? Were they all in it? Were they? I'm just like,
yeah.
I mean, that is a taxing role.
Absolutely.
And like 30 years later, was it good for your kids? Do you know what I mean?
It was amazing for my kids.
Okay.
My kids loved it. And all of our families loved it. They did not suffer at all. And here's the reason why. These were not great services. This was the tangible presence of God. We were created for his presence. So my son, who was only 5-6 years old at the time, my daughter, who's 8 years old, from the very beginning, they loved revival. They were there every night, not because they had to be. Mm-hmm. And they weren't, later on, they weren't there every night.
Sure.
But they loved it. And so, but we had to make adjustments. So for example, we ended up having to take them out of private school and end up homeschooling because of the time, and then I would intentionally be home every afternoon around 2:30, 3 o'clock when they were in school, so that I could be there to spend a couple of hours with them. I would rebound basketball every day for my son for an hour, make sure I had time with my daughter, and take a nap. Because again, what we haven't talked about is part of discipleship was even the prayer time. And I challenged our young people to meet me every morning at 7 o'clock in the prayer chapel before they went to school. Now, you never got to do it because you were in Gulf Breeze.
Yep.
But and I never condemned you for not being there. But every morning, so I'm leaving the church at 3:00 in the morning. I'm back at the church at 7:00 for a morning prayer meeting with our youth before they go to school.
Is that sustainable pace?
Only with the supernatural.
Okay, so family-wise, y'all had to make adjustments with
We
that.
had to make adjustments with our schedules. Actually, absolutely.
Okay, and did you take vacation during that time? Like, I mean,
Christmas.
that was it.
That was it.
And y'all eventually ended up taking the month of December off. Is that correct for revival? No.
2 weeks.
2 weeks. I'm sorry. I thought it was like, that is wild. 2 weeks. I'm talking about throughout the 5 years.
Yeah.
Still a couple weeks.
Correct.
When do you think it started to wane?
My personal opinion, I think it started to wane about the year 2000. And
It lasted, you would say it lasted that long.
I would say it lasted up to 5 years. There's a lot of people who say 8. I don't hold to that. I don't hold to that. We didn't want to acknowledge that it was over, but and who wants it to, right? I mean, whenever you have something like that.
But were you still having year 98, 99? I have heard, and I can't remember who it was, almost and I want you to correct me in this, almost the opposite. It was 2 to 3 years, and then the 2 to 3 years were kind of like the afterglow after it. But no.
I wouldn't hold to that. I wouldn't hold to that.
99, 2000, they're experiencing still legitimate.
Definitely 99. Definitely 99. And 2000, I would say definitely into it. Yeah. But 2000 is when Steve left to go to Texas. And
Why did he leave?
I think he realized that the end was coming. And Steve,
was there an agreement that he would stay, like come back?
No. He
wouldn't come back and preach. He was done.
I can't remember him coming back. He might have.
Sure.
But he went and planted a church in Texas. Correct. Right.
And was that a surprise to you?
No.
You knew he was going.
No, we felt again, you could feel a shift beginning to take place. So the very thing that I think that invited the presence of the Lord is the very thing also that allowed it to exit, and that was hunger. We were so hungry. There was a hunger there for the presence of God and I don't criticize anybody. In fact, I remember early in the revival, I'm talking months within the revival, we were meeting with the prayer team beforehand, and Steve Hill said something I thought was the stupidest thing I ever heard of. And he looked at us with sternness. He said, "Do not get used to this. Do not get used to this." And I'm thinking, that is the stupidest advice I have ever heard in my life. How can you get used to the tangible presence of God? Mm-hmm. And yet I have to confess, a couple of years into it, I'm standing on the platform. He's giving the altar call. Hundreds are racing to the altar, streaming with tears on their face. And I have to pinch myself and go, "Richard, don't get used to this."
Wow.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I mean, these people are experiencing, but after a while, you begin to get used to, and by the way, don't take your local churches for advantage of that.
For granted. Yeah.
For granted. Right. Last night I was in revival service here at Radiant, and I'm like, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And yet I know that your people go, yeah, this is what we get every Sunday, right?
Right.
But so there was a hunger that began to diminish, I think, within the congregation. And again, I'm not poo-pooing on that. I'm just saying I think that was real. And what we did was we were riding on the wave of the hunger of the people who were taking their vacations and spending thousands of dollars to come stand in line in the Florida heat all day with anticipation and hunger for the presence of God. We begin to ride on their hunger. But then after, I believe, around 99, 2000, you had a lot of repeats.
Right. They were
who had
coming
been there
back.
3 or 4 times, and the number of new people were diminishing. You have your return. And so even that hunger, I just feel like there was a slow shift in the hunger in the presence of the Lord.
Did
for
the
presence.
crowds begin to diminish around 2000?
Yes, slightly. You can see a slight turn down.
Okay. And that wasn't, Steve Hill wasn't looking at that going, I'm preaching the same people that are coming back. They've been here every 2 years.
I think he was.
Yeah.
I think he was. I think Steve was very perceptive. And I think that Steve was going, okay, we're having a lot of repeats. You know.
And when did the Awake America stuff start?
In my memory, probably around 98.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they started to travel, do that stuff. How did they manage being out and then still doing revival services?
To my recollection, different ones would preach at the revival service. I got to preach a few times, you know, and that's when they would bring in a couple other people.
Yeah, I remember Jensen being there a
Jensen
bunch,
Franklin.
people like that. So, all right, so we've talked Awake America, people start traveling. What happens after 2000 when Steve Hill leaves? Who's leading the revival? Who's preaching?
So they are inviting different individuals coming in. That's when Damon Thompson even started to come.
Okay.
And Jensen Franklin and different speakers had come each night.
Was it maintenance mode? Was it like we're trying to maintain something, or was it still like we're having moments like God's here?
Yeah. So from this point on, there's a lot of my opinion.
Yeah. No, that's where we want to get to.
Yeah. I think that we did not want to admit that it was over with.
Yeah.
And who would want to,
Right.
you know? And so I do believe that we began to try to sustain something that was unsustainable. And this is when people begin to get hurt. This is when offenses begin to happen. This is when divisions begin to take place.
When did the split happen?
In 2002,
Okay.
I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you weren't involved in that scenario.
I was not involved in it
Yes.
as far as the split is concerned, correct.
And how did it affect you?
And by the way, he's talking about the split of the school and the church.
The school was 1,200 people.
Right.
And they split. Half of them went with Dr. Brown. Half of them stayed at this school, at the church. And how did Pastor Kilpatrick lead through that? I mean, like, was he just, this is what we're doing?
Yes. So that's always how he leads. This is how we're doing.
Right.
You know, and when he and Dr. Brown had a difference in perspective and direction, Dr. Brown split and started Fire School of Ministry, and BRSM continued underneath the umbrella of the church. And at that point, Pastor tapped me on the shoulder and asked me if I would be the interim president. Mm-hmm. And so I was pastoring 1,200 teenagers, doing all the conference speaking, and running a school at the same time for 2.5 years.
And you got pretty burned out.
Oh, I don't even remember those days.
Right.
I was averaging preaching 9 times a week.
That is unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Because I do want to talk about those from 2000 on till basically Pastor Kilpatrick resigned in 2003.
Yeah.
Okay. And you were there when he resigned?
I was there. I did not leave until 2004.
You left in 2004.
Right.
Okay. So those years after, because it feels like that's where the wheels kind of fell off the bus.
Right.
A lot. That's where a lot of when you hear a lot of the church hurt stuff, there was a lot of that. What was the cause? What was happening? Was it just we were still trying to sustain stuff? We were trying to, we were running at a pace that was never okay. I mean, you got the school splitting. You've got a lot of negative press. You got, the church finances seemed like it was a wreck. Maybe somewhat.
Well, yeah, which I think I want to steer away from that part. But yeah. So one of the main takeaways for me, Aaron, is that when you have such a high level of his presence, tangible presence, there really is there is a demand that it puts upon people to a standard of holiness, a living clean and pure before the Lord. That's the reason why in the book of Acts, the presence of God was so rich and thick in the early church that Ananias and Sapphira are killed simply for lying.
Right.
That's all. I mean, dude, we'd all be dead if that was the standard now. So in my opinion, what happened was the presence of the Lord began to diminish, the manifest presence, the awareness presence of the Lord. But we were trying to sustain a standard that was up here that is impossible to live in the natural. And that's where you slip into legalism. That's where you slip into manipulation and control and hurt.
Did you see a lot of that?
I felt like I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you try to counter a lot of that, or were you in it and you were?
In the youth department, I could control,
Right.
And then in the school, I tried to bring a level of grace to the school and those type of things.
Yeah. Yeah. It was not a very grace culture. And I mean,
oh no.
I mean, I remember, just as coming in afterwards, even just, there was still such a stigma. Like, you can't watch a movie, you can't go, it's like, there was a lot of like that, living off of that, I guess is it good intentions of, this is the hunger and the lifestyle that got us into revival, this will get us back?
I think so. Although they wouldn't have said back.
They would have said next level.
Yeah, right.
What do you do with the prophetic words that, we heard, and and I high respect for, a Dr. Cho, this is never going to end. I remember being in the services going, we're in the revival of repentance. The next one's going to be the revival of miracles. Now it's going to, I remember just hearing, it was always what's next. There's always going to go. And then it doesn't. Like, what is that?
That's a great question, man.
I told you I'm not going to prep you beforehand on all this.
Right. One of the things that I think that I did learn also is that we've got to learn to celebrate where we're at.
That's great.
Okay?
Yeah.
Because I remember in the revival, those declarations. In fact, I did my very first 40-day water fast during the revival. Okay? Because I kept hearing, there's going to be signs and wonders and miracles. And I believe that if you want something you've never had before, you have to do something you've never done before. So I went into this 40-day fast.
Water only.
On water only. Okay, you were in the youth group at the time, and
I was not doing that water only fast.
You weren't doing it with me, but nobody. This was a secret thing, and thinking that I'm going to come out of this thing doing sign wonders and miracles. I really did, and it was the most miserable 40 days of my life. Because the opposite was happening. God was showing me all the dirt in my life, and that he couldn't use me to do signs, wonders, and miracles, because then I'd just jump on the plane and tell everybody what I did. Right. That kind of thing. And it was really ugly. But I think sometimes we've got to learn contentment without satisfaction. Content with where we are, celebrating what God is doing right now to give us the energy to keep moving forward, right? But so many times we are always looking for that next thing, and tripping on the very thing that God's doing for us right now.
Yeah, very good. Yeah,
and I think sometimes that prophetic thing. I believe in the prophetic. I much of my life has been governed by the prophetic. My reason for being at Rochester is because of the prophetic. But I'm afraid that a lot of the prophetic is wishful thinking and tickling of the ears and that type of thing.
I agree. When did the last revival service? Because Pastor Kirkpatrick resigned in 2003. Were they still doing services?
To my recollection, we were still doing services, not every day.
Right.
But we were doing like
a
Friday, Saturday, Sunday type thing. Even whenever I left at 2004.
Still doing that?
I think we were still doing that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why did he resign?
You'll have to ask him that. I will remember.
Did you know?
Huh?
Did you know he was resigning?
Nobody knew. I was on the road.
You weren't there.
I
This
wouldn't
is
even-
Pastor's Appreciation Day.
It was Pastor's Appreciation Day. I was on the road doing a conference with about 2 van loads of BRSM students, doing a conference in recruiting because now I'm the president of the school. And I get a phone call that John Kilpatrick resigned. And
You didn't have an idea.
nobody knew. Listen, when he went to church that day, he did not know.
Really?
Yeah, so they do this Pastor Appreciation Day. He calls Brenda, his wife, up. He turns her. He says, "I'm about to resign." She sits down. He walks to the.
His wife didn't know.
He didn't know. Listen, it was. That's John Kilpatrick, though, which is one reason why God could use him in revival, because he was willing to throw caution to the wind. You've got
So
to
there
have
wasn't.
guts.
There's not some offense. There's not something where hey, I'm upset. I'm leaving the church.
Again, I can't
You don't-
speak for
okay,
him.
yeah.
This is it. God told me to resign. I'm resigning right now. He gets up and resigns. Everybody's like blindsided.
And how did you take that?
I was mad.
Mad.
Partly because 2 different times I had tried to resign and he wouldn't let me.
Why'd you try to resign?
I just felt like it was time for me to go. And I actually had a church in Daphne that was giving me an invitation. And
Yeah. So he wouldn't let you go. Did y'all ever have any like throwdown moments, you and Pastor? Like
you don't have throwdown moments with John Kilpatrick. We had those 2-3 o'clock in the morning meetings. There were times when I would express to John Kilpatrick things. I would share with him things that I'm seeing and things that I knew that he didn't know because everybody was trying to protect him. They were trying to. They knew he was carrying a heavy load, and they didn't want to dump something on him that would weigh him down. But I knew, and I loved him, and I loved the church so much. I knew he needed to know these things. And so there were things that I would tell him that nobody else had the courage to tell him. And I could see the pain on his face. Okay. But I also knew that if he didn't know it, he was going to get blindsided. And so we had those kind of conversations.
Did he respect that? I mean, did he receive it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, he never took my advice, but because I always believe that, if you're going to present a problem, you need to give some solutions.
Right.
But no, to this day, I think that he and I both have deep, deep, deep respect for each other.
That's great. You and Dr. Brown during all of that. I mean, despite the split.
Yeah, I never turned against him. I supported, know.
Yeah. When did Lyndall leave?
Lyndall left did Lyndall leave right before? No, he left right. I'm trying to remember. It was right before or right after John Kilpatrick. I can't remember.
Okay. So it was around the same time.
Yeah.
And then the new pastor took over.
Randy Felshaw.
And he took over, and the church was just in free fall.
Correct. He's a hero of the faith.
He is. Why?
Because he had to do a lot of cleaning up. We had let a lot of people go on staff. I had to start taking care of some of the financial downfall because the crowds were not coming now. The money had, but yet we had all these bills and all that. And so he had to do a lot of cleanup. Yeah. Randy will always be a hero of mine.
Was it tough for you to resign during his tenure then? If he was?
No, actually it was easier for me to work for Randy Felshaw than for Pastor Kilpatrick in the sense that Randy and I shared more in-line philosophy. He was a John Maxwell guy as well,
Yeah.
So, but let me make it real clear. I loved working for John Kilpatrick.
Yeah.
And it was because he let me have full reign of the youth department or whatever I was over. He never told me what to do. He had 100% confidence in my decision making. And even though maybe I did things differently than him, much differently than him, he honored that. So there was a great mutual honor there.
All right. So you're past it now. We're 30 years past, 25 years after revival services. you have amazing ministry. God's used your life. Looking back, what would you say? These are some of the pain points or the weaknesses that maybe not if you were in charge, but if you had to do it over again, we maybe would do this different.
So it is difficult because what other move of God do you know of has lasted for 5 years?
None.
Right?
None.
And the amazing fruit continues to come from that move of God. So to answer this question, could maybe have messed up that 5 years.
Right.
Right? I do think, though, that we missed it in the sense of not coming up with some way of creating some better discipleship. The youth department did great at that.
Yep.
I think overall we did not. That would be one thing. And I probably would have recommended some break times, even if it was, we're going to take 2 or 3 days off a week, to recuperate physically, emotionally, relationally, families, all of that. But again, we didn't do that because we knew people were literally taking their annual vacations and spending thousands of dollars to come, not to sit in a hotel for 2 or 3 days while we're recuperating.
Right.
So we were literally sacrificing ourselves on the behalf of those people who were so hungry for God. And so, that's a tough one. That really is tough.
Do you think it's sustainable? I mean, I would put you in that category. I'd put the other 3 or 4 men in that category of like the leaders of that revival. Do you think it's sustainable for a person to have that much? It's a lot of pressure to perform. I mean, everywhere you go, you've got to bring that everywhere. And then and I know you don't, you said that not getting into the money stuff, but there is a lot of money. There's a lot of ego. Do you think that was all managed well? Do you think it was all like, not the money side, but like the ego, the personal ministry stuff? Like, do you think that was part of maybe some of the decline? People get too big for who a person should be.
Yeah. I am very proud of my colleagues. I think for the most part, each of us walked in a tremendous amount of humility and did our very best to give God the glory. Having said that, after 3-4 years of sustaining that, I do think that after a while, you can't help but hear the press every once in a while.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And maybe did not have as much fear, as much awe, as much humility as before. And yeah, absolutely. I do think that could be part of the diminishing downfall.
The years, I'm thinking 99 to 2002, 2003, the years of post-revival or even extreme revival into post-revival. Do you think staff that were there that was a great experience? Or I got burned out? I think everybody would do it again. Everybody would do it again. Wow.
Everybody would do it again.
Wow.
Yeah. Even though many of us left there, when I ended up leaving in 2004, I was a shell of a person. I'd given everything.
You'd given
I had nothing left to give.
Yep.
Yeah.
Did you leave hurt?
There were some offenses that I had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how did you work through those?
God gave me God moments that I can't even share on here, but I'll share with you personally. I can't share it on here, but
we'll record it for you.
But there were God things that would make your head spin.
Yeah.
That God protected me and gave me grace.
Whatever happened to this school? When did it shut down?
So when I left, Keith Collins took it for a little while.
Okay.
And then, who's the gentleman? It went to underneath.
It left. They took.
Yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
I've gone blank at the moment.
That's okay. So I came in 2006. I preached there. I was a missionary overseas doing some work. I did not go to BRSM. I went to Southeastern, did some missions work, came back in 2006. Chad Boney, who was the youth pastor there, who was one of your spiritual sons, had taken over. I preached for Chad, and then I started a business in town to fund missions work. And then at the beginning of 2007, and then Pastor Evan came in 2006.
Yes.
And I remember when he came and he started Labor Day weekend, 2006, church was $10.9 million in debt, 300 people in the pews, total free fall. I remember their interest-only mortgage payment was $84,000 a month. And I remember that number specifically, where he had to come.
Was how much?
$84,000 a month, interest-only mortgage payment. And it might have been more than that. Pastor Evan can correct me, but he walked into a mess. I mean, Felshaw was a saint because I remember before Felshaw resigned, or maybe it was right when the board was in charge, they laid off about 100 employees or something just to get it ready, because they knew whoever was going to take over next was picking up. Because no church, from what I understand in revival history, no church that has been through anything even similar to that has ever survived.
Right.
And I do want to give Pastor Evan a shout out, because he is a hero of mine.
Absolutely.
I mean, you two are my two pastors in my life that have been in my life for a long time. But I was one of his first hires. I remember taking over the youth group. I remember taking over Hearts Ablaze, and it was such a big honor to carry your legacy forward. Taking over Branded by Fire, which was such a huge deal and a huge blessing. And to see that, but it was weird to see the fallout of the church, to see the community around it had only not the church community, the community that surrounded the church was so messy. So I'm like, and there's the weird thoughts looking back going, they impacted the world, but our backyard was messed up. It's like, how do you deal with the fallout? How do you deal with the people that go, I've walked away from the faith, I'm hurt, I'm offended, I got abused, there was flesh that got, that was involved in stuff. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are going to watch this that are going, yeah, I was part of that thing. And I don't have the same experience that you just said. I'd do it again. What's your word to them? Like, what's your encouragement for the people that go, I want revival, but the fallout is,
Right. Even through the revival, I remember thinking over and over and over again, what has a man gained if he should win the whole world and lose his own family? That was the way I always interpreted it.
Wow.
And I do not believe it is the will of God for us to have just chaos and shipwreck all around us in order to host the presence of God. I don't think that's appropriate. And I think that we've got to learn to contend for a healthy lifestyle. That's spirit, soul, body, social, all of it. I believe that's the will of God. And we did the very best that we could with what we knew, but there are lessons that I think that we can learn from that. I would say, again, I do believe that part of it is discipleship. Discipleship is teaching people how to even deal with disappointments and hurts and offenses and how to forgive and all of that. But we didn't have that luxury. And so, again, legalism begins to rise up and hurts and offenses. And
what would your encouragement be to the person that is hurt?
Remember what Jesus did do for you. Don't remember what people did to you. Remember the presence of the Lord. Remember the freedom, the joy, the life.
Yeah.
I mean, do not throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
People even under the best of intentions will make mistakes, will hurt you. I'm sure that there are people that I've even hurt, but that was never our intention, and don't let the enemy poison you toward the very thing that we were all created for, and that was to host the presence of the Lord on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to bring him everywhere we go.
What would you tell a church that says, man, we want revival?
I would say you got to count the cost. And I would say don't try to do what you need to have a good definition of what revival is, which is not just more services.
Right.
It's not manifestations. It's not any of that. It's growing in an intimate relationship with Jesus and seeing others have the same, and it's going to look different. I mean, the Asbury College move of the
amazing.
Spirit was very mellow, very calm.
Yeah.
And I remember people calling me, is that the move of God? And I went to the Lord, and I didn't go, but I said, Lord, why does it look this way? And he said, what's the number one definition for the young generation right now? And it's anxiety. If someone with anxiety would have walked into Brownsville, oh my God, they would have been triggered instantly.
Absolutely.
They need the calm, peaceful presence of God. That's what this generation needs right now. And so that's what it's looking like, I feel like, right now. But we're seeing, even here in Tampa, I'm looking around at what's happening at Radiant, filled with young adults who are passionately in love with Jesus, going after Jesus day and night. And so it's going to look different, and we need to be open to that.
I think history is starting to write and will continue to write about the Brownsville Revival. If you were asked, what's the legacy of the Brownsville Revival, what would you say it is?
I would say it is the large number of people who to this day love Jesus and are actively involved in ministry, either professionally or not.
Yeah.
I mean, Aaron, I don't know if you know this, but I think it was 1998. We had 99 high school graduates in 1999 in our youth ministry. 75 of them went into full-time ministry.
That's unbelievable.
And almost every one of them are still in full-time ministry.
God. That's amazing.
That's the fruit of revival.
Yeah.
That's not me.
Yeah.
And so there is a desperate need for the Holy Spirit to move. And he will. Listen, he will. He said, in the last days, I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Not those who love church or love Jesus, all flesh. It's going to happen. It will.
What about Richard Crisco's legacy? What do you think that is going to be defined as?
I hope it's defined as my sons and daughters who love Jesus. That's what I hope. Yeah. It's always been that way. I've always said I never want my name engraved in concrete. I want my spirit engraved in the heart of the next generation.
It's incredible. Well, I honor you for what you did to me. Yeah, and for how you poured into my life. I was the worst kid in his youth group, by the way. I really was. The Lord encountered my life at 16 years old, called me into ministry. And I had to come back and apologize to you and Donnie. I remember sitting down with Donnie. I was like, I want to be a leader. He's like, are you sure? Are you saved? I remember when I became a youth pastor, you were still not sure. You were like, are you sure you're into this thing? I do want to just take a second and honor, even just the leaders during revival, and they don't know who I am other than you, Pastor, but the Lindell Cooleys and John Kilpatrick's, and obviously Steve Hill went home to be with the Lord. I remember being at that funeral, and seeing Dr. Brown and just those people who are heroes of. So I just want to just say
Chaplain Robinson.
Yep. So many that have done that have just served for years and years and years, faithful to the Lord. And do you think it'll happen again in our lifetime, something like that?
I don't know that it's going to happen like that again.
Yeah.
I think it'll be different.
Yeah.
I think it'll be more organically on the streets. I think more people will just be carrying the presence of the Lord everywhere they go, and just,
Awesome. I agree. Well, thanks for listening, and make sure you subscribe, and we try to put out good content. I hope this has helped you, and I hope this is a video that's a cool resource for years to come for the Brownsville Revival. Thanks.